part of my story, my health challenges, bad relationships, things that could have knocked somebody down completely hardcore. I was never the smartest kid on the block. I worked my tail off to fight through school, and then I met Chris. My health challenges happened. I was diagnosed with some health challenges, and then I met Chris. I met Chris because of those health challenges. My friend sent me a friend suggestion for him. It was actually his cousin's wife, and I deleted it. I was like, I'm not interested. I don't want to meet a guy. Bye-bye. So I deleted her friend suggestion for him. In the part where I gave up on everything, I quit my job. It was kind of temporarily, but kind of quit my job of 9 years. I just said, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. You don't understand me. You don't understand what's going on in my life. And I quit. And I got a friend request from Chris. I was in a really, really, really bad place. And I got a friend request from Chris on Facebook. And I was like, oh, what the heck? I'm never going to meet him. Except, one thing led to another. And 8 years later, we have 2 kids. We live in Colorado. And he's the best thing that has ever happened to me.
I love you.
And stand by you.
And stand by you.
As long as we both shall live.
As long as we both shall live.
And because of my health challenges, because I got so sick, I let him in. And he only knew me at that time. He knew me at my worst. And he accepted me. And, you know, through your vows, like through sickness and everything, he's been there. He was the one that let me lay on him and fall asleep for 3.5 hours on his lap while he had to pee. He is the best thing that has ever happened to me.
The morning sun over Frederick, Colorado, on August 13th, 2018, seemed to illuminate a tragedy in progress. But for Chris Watts, it was merely the opening act of a cold-blooded charade. Shanann Watts, 15 weeks pregnant with their son, Nico, had vanished along with their 2 young daughters, Bella and Celeste. As the local police arrived at the Saratoga Trail home for a welfare check, the world saw what looked like a panicked husband rushing home to assist. But as the body cam footage would later reveal to millions, the man who pulled into that driveway wasn't a victim of circumstance. He was a man who had already moved on. The chilling nature of this case lies in the immediate, visceral lack of empathy Chris displayed. While his neighbor, Nate Trenastich, played back security footage that showed Chris backing his truck into the garage, a move he never usually made, Chris didn't look at the screen with fear or hope. He paced, he put his hands behind his head, and he fidgeted, with a nervous energy that looked more like guilt than grief. When he spoke to the officers, his voice lacked the frantic edge of a father whose children are missing. He was clinical, detached, and strangely preoccupied with the mundane. He wasn't looking for signs of a struggle. He was looking to see if he had been caught. The title of this narrative, I Showed Her, encapsulates the dark pivot in Chris's mind. For years, he had been the compliant, beta husband, following Shanann's lead and playing the role of the doting father for her frequent social media updates. But behind that quiet exterior, a toxic resentment had been festering. To Chris, Shanann's strong personality had become a cage. In his mind, killing her wasn't just about removing an obstacle to his new life with his mistress. It was a final, horrific act of defiance. By erasing her existence, he believed he was finally taking back control. He was showing her that she could no longer dictate his reality. As he stood on his front porch the following day, giving interviews to local news stations, the mask slipped further. He smiled at inappropriate times. He referred to his daughters in the past tense, saying those kids instead of their names. He spoke about how the house felt empty, but his tone suggested relief rather than heartbreak. To anyone watching closely, it was clear. Chris Watts didn't care that they were gone. He was only concerned with how well he was playing the part of the grieving survivor. The emptiness he described wasn't a void in his heart. It was the space he had cleared for himself, a space he had paid for with the lives of his family. On August 15th, 2018, the small, windowless interrogation room at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation became the stage for one of the most unsettling displays of psychological detachment ever recorded. Chris Watts sat across from Agents Tammy Lee and Graham Coda, appearing like a man burdened by a secret, yet his physical presence suggested something far more hollow. For hours he maintained the nice guy persona, a facade built on years of being the man who never raised his voice. But as the agents pressed him, the "I showed her" mentality began to seep through the cracks of his polite denials. The investigators weren't just looking for a confession, they were hunting for the person Chris had become behind closed doors. They showed him photos of Bella and Celeste, hoping for a flicker of fatherly instinct, a tear or a momentary break in his composure. Instead, Chris looked at the images of his own children as if they were strangers in a catalogue. He didn't reach out to touch the photos. He didn't weep for their safety. He remained focused on his own survival. This wasn't the behavior of a man in shock. It was the behavior of a man who had already mentally buried them. The chilling reality was that to Chris, his daughters were no longer his children. They were evidence. When the polygraph test results came back, showing a devastating failure, the investigators changed their tactics. They offered him a way out, a twisted narrative that suggested Shanann was the one who had hurt the girls, and he had simply reacted. It was a lifeline designed to appeal to his ego. In that moment, Chris made a choice that defined his true nature. He didn't defend his wife's honor or scream that she would never hurt their babies. Instead, he eagerly snatched the lie. He painted Shanann as a monster, claiming he saw her strangling Celeste on the baby monitor. By blaming her, he was showing her, one last time, discrediting her life and her motherhood to save his own skin. This chapter of the investigation reveals the terrifying truth. Chris Watts didn't just lack empathy. He weaponized his indifference. He sat in that room and lied about the woman he had spent years with, portraying her as a killer while he knew her body was currently cooling in a shallow grave at a remote oil site. He felt no remorse for the character assassination he was performing. In his mind, she deserved it for making him do what he did. As he spoke, the words that would eventually lead to his downfall, his voice remained steady, his pulse didn't race, and his heart didn't break. He was a man who had completely detached from the humanity of his family, viewing their destruction as a necessary step toward his own perceived freedom. The drive to the Cervi 319 oil site in the pre-dawn hours of August 16th, 2018, was the final journey for the truth. As investigators followed the coordinates Chris Watts had finally provided, they were prepared for a recovery mission. But they were not prepared for the sheer level of indignity Chris had inflicted upon his family. The site, a remote patch of dirt and steel owned by his employer, Anadarko Petroleum, was not a place of rest. It was a disposal ground. The way Chris chose to hide the bodies of his wife and daughters provided the most damning evidence of his "I showed her" mindset. It wasn't just murder. It was an act of total erasure. Search teams first located the shallow grave where Shanann had been buried. She was found in a fetal position, discarded in the dirt without a casket, a shroud, or a moment of hesitation. But the true horror lay within the two massive crude oil tanks standing nearby. Chris had climbed the stairs to the top of those tanks and squeezed the small, lifeless bodies of 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste through 8-inch openings. He had submerged his own children in toxic, black sludge. This act was so depraved that it defied the typical logic of a crime of passion. It was a clinical, mechanical process of making his problems disappear. The physical evidence at the site told a story of absolute indifference. To fit the girls through the narrow hatches, Chris had to have known the trauma it would cause to their small frames. Yet he proceeded anyway. He then went about his workday at the site as if nothing had happened, even texting his mistress and eating his lunch while his family lay feet away in the darkness of the tanks. This is the core of the dark corner true crime narrative. The terrifying ability of a human being to switch off their humanity entirely. By placing them there, he wasn't just hiding bodies, he was treating them like industrial waste. When investigators later asked him why he chose the oil tanks, his answers remained disturbingly practical. There was no mention of the pain he felt or the weight of his actions. He spoke of the site as a matter of convenience. In his mind, the girls were gone, and the tanks offered a way to ensure they stayed gone. This chilling pragmatism is what haunts this case. He had showed Shanann that she could no longer protect them, and he had showed his daughters that their lives were secondary to his desire for a clean slate. The recovery process took days, requiring experts to drain the oil and cut into the steel. A grim necessity caused by a man who didn't care enough to give his children even the dignity of a grave. While the recovery at the oil site was underway, digital forensics teams were peeling back the layers of Chris Watts's second life. The "I showed her" mentality wasn't a spontaneous eruption of violence. It was a slow-burn transformation, fueled by a digital obsession. Investigators gained access to his phone and discovered a hidden, secret calculator app, a common tool used to hide photos and messages behind a functional calculator interface. Inside, they found the blueprint of a man who had checked out of his marriage months before the murders. He had been meticulously documenting his affair with Nicole Kessinger, capturing a reality where Shanann, Bella, and Celeste simply did not exist. The data revealed a man living in 2 different worlds. In one, he was the recipient of Shanann's heartfelt texts, where she pleaded with him to talk to her and help fix their crumbling relationship. She sent him books on marriage counseling and expressed her heartbreak over his sudden coldness. Chris's responses were short, monosyllabic, and devoid of any warmth. In the other world, he was vibrant and engaged, searching for secluded vacation spots with his mistress and looking up, "Man, I'm in love with my girlfriend." The contrast was jarring. He wasn't a man struggling with a difficult choice. He was a man who had already decided that his family was a debt he no longer intended to pay. The most chilling aspect of the digital evidence was the timing. While Shanann was away on a business trip, desperately missing her husband, Chris was taking his mistress to the Mustang Lounge and searching for the lyrics to dark, aggressive songs. He was looking up the price of an Audi and researching how to tell someone you don't love them anymore. He wasn't just drifting away. He was actively replacing his old life. To Chris, every moment spent with his mistress was a victory over the life Shanann had built for them. He was showing her by proving that he could be happy, passionate, and free, as long as she and the children weren't in the picture. If you are finding this deep dive into the mind of a killer compelling, make sure to like and subscribe to the Dark Corner True Crime channel for more investigative series. The digital trail also exposed a terrifying lack of foresight. Chris believed that by deleting his Facebook account and clearing his browser history, he could erase the past. He underestimated the permanence of the digital age, just as he underestimated the intuition of those who loved Shanann. He thought he was being clever, But the trail he left behind was a roadmap of his indifference. Each search query and hidden photo was a brick in the wall he built between himself and his humanity, leading directly to the moment he decided that showing her required the ultimate, irreversible act. While Chris Watts continued to spin a web of lies to investigators, the bodies of his family were finally being recovered from the oil site to undergo a grueling forensic examination. The autopsy reports would serve as the ultimate truth-tellers, providing a silent testimony that Chris could not manipulate or erase. These documents laid bare the raw physical reality of his "I showed her" philosophy. They proved that what happened on the morning of August 13th was not a crime of passion or a sudden loss of control, but a series of deliberate, cold-blooded executions. The autopsy of Shanann Watts revealed the sheer force used against her. There were no defensive wounds, no scratches on her hands or broken fingernails, which suggested she may have been attacked while sleeping or otherwise incapacitated. The cause of death was manual strangulation. The bruising on her neck was deep and localized, indicating a steady, unwavering pressure. For Chris to show her that he was done, he had to look into her eyes for several minutes as the life left her body. The report also confirmed the death of her unborn son, Nico. In his quest for a new life, Chris had extinguished his future heir without a second thought, treating the pregnancy not as a miracle, but as another tether he needed to cut. However, the findings regarding Bella and Celeste were what truly horrified the medical examiners. The girls had been submerged in crude oil for 4 days, a fact that complicated the autopsies, but couldn't hide the truth. Bella, the eldest, had fought for her life. The autopsy revealed lacerations on the inside of her lip and evidence that she had bitten her own tongue during the struggle. Unlike her mother, Bella knew what was happening. She had watched her father kill her sister and then turn his hands on her. The nice guy father had looked at his 4-year-old daughter pleading for her life and chose to continue. This was the pinnacle of his indifference. His desire for a fresh start outweighed the biological instinct to protect his own flesh and blood. The presence of oil in the girls' lungs and stomachs suggested a final indignity that Chris had hoped would remain hidden. The physical evidence debunked his initial story that Shanann had killed the girls. The patterns of injury and the logistics of the disposal pointed solely to him. The autopsy reports stripped away the "I'm a good man" narrative Chris tried to project. They showed a man who was capable of extreme, sustained violence against the most vulnerable people in his life. Every bruise and every mark on those 3 bodies was a factual record of a man who had decided that his family no longer mattered. He didn't just kill them, he attempted to degrade them even in death, proving that his apathy was his most dangerous trait. On August 21st, 2018, the Weld County District Attorney's Office officially filed 9 felony charges against Chris Watts, including 3 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of murdering a child under 12 while in a position of trust, 1 count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. As the charges were read, the public facade Chris had tried so desperately to maintain didn't just crack, it vanished.
For a first appearance, Mr. Warwick, correct me if I'm wrong, but formal charges have not been filed yet?
That's correct, Your Honor. The defendant was arrested. Formal charges have not been filed. By my calculation, I believe it will be due to the court at 3:30 on Monday afternoon.
Thank you. Mr. Mercer, anything you would like to say about that?
Not regarding that issue, thank you.
So the court has reviewed a affidavit in support of a warrantless arrest. The court has found probable cause for the arrest. Specifically, I see that Mr. Watts was arrested for 3 counts of first-degree murder, each a Class 1.
The nice guy from the neighborhood was now officially a monster in the eyes of the law. The courtroom became a place where his "I showed her" mentality met the cold, hard reality of the American justice system. The evidence presented during the preliminary stages was overwhelming. Prosecutors revealed that Chris had been planning a future with his mistress for weeks, even looking at houses and checking prices for a diamond ring. The transition from a family man to a murderer wasn't a snap decision. It was a calculated pivot. The courtroom sat in stunned silence as the prosecution detailed the logistics of the crime, how he had loaded the bodies of his wife and children into his work truck and driven them 45 minutes to the oil site. He had sat in that truck with his dead wife at his feet and his living daughters in the back seat, driven by a singular, chilling focus: his own liberation. During these proceedings, Chris's demeanor remained disturbingly flat. He sat at the defense table, often looking down, avoiding the eyes of Shanann's family, the Rzucheks, who sat just feet away, shattered by grief. While the world watched in horror, Chris seemed more like a man annoyed by the inconvenience of the trial than a man burdened by the weight of his sins. He didn't cry for his daughters. He didn't offer a word of apology. He simply existed in a vacuum of his own making. To Chris, the courtroom was just another place where people were making a big deal out of something he had already moved past in his mind. This chapter of the story highlights the total disconnect between the perpetrator and his victims. As the community held vigils and strangers from across the globe sent flowers to the Saratoga Trail. Home, Chris was focused on his legal defense. He was still trying to find a way to come out on top, still hoping that some version of his "I showed her" narrative would stick. But the facts were indisputable. The GPS from his truck, the data from his phone, and the silent testimony of the autopsies created a cage from which there was no escape. The man who thought he had finally taken control of his life was now realizing that his final act of defiance had only ensured he would spend the rest of his days in a 6-by-9-foot cell. By November 2018, the mountain of evidence against Chris Watts had become insurmountable. Facing the very real possibility of the death penalty, Chris made a choice that once again centered on his own survival. In a move that shocked those following the case, he entered a plea deal, pleading guilty to all 9 counts against him. In exchange, the prosecution agreed not to seek the death penalty, a decision made with the blessing of Shanann's family, who wanted the nightmare to end without decades of appeals. But the plea didn't bring immediate clarity. It only highlighted the lingering question of how a man could do this. It wasn't until February 2019, during a 5-hour follow-up interview with investigators at the Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin, that the full, unvarnished truth emerged. The confession tapes recorded during this session are among the most harrowing pieces of evidence in true crime history. In these recordings, Chris finally dropped the lie that Shanann had hurt the girls. He admitted, with a terrifyingly calm voice, that he had killed all 3 of them himself. He described the morning in detail, the argument with Shanann, the manual strangulation, and the moments his daughters walked into the room while he was disposing of their mother's body. The chilling core of this confession was his admission that he didn't just act in a heat of passion. He described a man who had completely detached from reality. He told investigators that when he strangled Shanann, he felt he couldn't stop it. But his "I showed her" mentality was most evident when he spoke about his daughter's final moments. He recounted how Bella, after watching him dispose of her sister in the oil tank, looked at him and asked, "Is the same thing going to happen to me?" Her final words were, "Daddy, no, And Chris proceeded anyway. He spoke about these moments, not with a sobbing breakdown, but with the flat, analytical tone of someone describing a movie they had seen long ago. These tapes revealed that Chris Watts had spent the journey to the oil site praying to get away with it, rather than praying for the souls of his family. He admitted that he felt like he was acting through the entire process. This wasn't a man broken by what he had done. It was a man who was fascinated by his own capacity for coldness. For those following this case on Dark Corner True Crime, this chapter serves as a stark reminder that evil often looks mundane. Chris Watts didn't look like a monster, but his own words proved that he had spent that August morning methodically showing his family that they were nothing more than obstacles to his new, hollow freedom. On November 19th, 2018, the gavel finally fell. Chris Watts was sentenced to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 84 years for the secondary charges. In the courtroom, the Zhuchek family delivered victim impact statements that shook the rafters, speaking of a pain that no prison sentence could ever heal. Through it all, Chris sat largely stone-faced. The man who had sought a fresh start by erasing his past had succeeded only in trading a suburban home for a concrete cell. He had showed the world exactly who he was, but the audience was not filled with admirers. It was filled with a horrified public that saw a void where a soul should be. The aftermath of the Watts case transformed the Saratoga Trail house from a family home into a grim landmark. It stood as a silent witness to the fact that domestic violence and psychopathic detachment don't always wear a mask of rage. Sometimes they wear a smile and a nice guy t-shirt. Even years later, the case remains a focal point for criminologists and true crime enthusiasts alike. It forces us to confront the terrifying reality that someone can be all in on a family for years, only to decide in a matter of weeks that those same people are disposable. Chris's inability to feel the weight of his actions remains the most chilling takeaway for every student of the dark corners of the human mind. Today, Chris Watts spends his days in a maximum security facility in Wisconsin. Reports suggest he has surrounded himself with photos of the family he destroyed, claiming to have found religion and seeking forgiveness. To many, this is seen as just another layer of his narcissism, a way to remain the protagonist in a story where he is undeniably the villain. He continues to send letters and give interviews that oscillate between feigned remorse and cold pragmatism. He is a man trapped in the "I showed her" loop, forever trying to rewrite a narrative that the facts have already set in stone. The legacy of the Watts family is not found in the man in the prison cell, but in the memories of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico. Their lives were cut short by a man who mistook his own apathy for strength. As we close this investigation on the Dark Corner True Crime channel, we are reminded that the most dangerous monsters aren't the ones under the bed, but the ones who tuck the children in before turning out the lights. If this deep dive into the factual and psychological reality of the Chris Watts case resonated with you, please like and subscribe to help us keep shedding light on the cases that haunt the shadows of our world.